The private hospital stood like a fortress of glass and steel on the edge of the city, a place where only the wealthiest and most powerful sought treatment, its polished marble floors gleaming like mirrors, its walls lined with expensive artworks meant to reassure the rich that even illness here was luxurious. Yet on that stormy night the air inside was anything but calm, thick with panic and whispers as word spread that Emily Gray, the beloved only daughter of Alexander Gray, the feared and respected CEO of Gray Global Enterprises, a man whose decisions moved markets and crushed rivals, was fighting for her life behind the closed doors of the VIP ward, her condition deteriorating by the hour despite the army of specialists surrounding her, and outside that ward Alexander paced with the restless energy of a lion in a cage, his usually composed figure disheveled, his tailored suit wrinkled, his expensive silk tie tugged loose, his salt and pepper hair disordered from running his hands through it, his gray eyes bloodshot and raw, not with anger, the emotion that had built his empire, but with something far rarer in him. Fear, the primal terror of a father watching his child slip away while powerless to stop it, and around him the hospital director and senior physicians muttered in hushed tones, their faces pale because they had run every test possible, every scan, every blood panel, and still they could not explain why the 18-year-old girl inside the room was collapsing, her heart rate spiking and plummeting, her skin turning clammy, her lips losing color, her breaths becoming shorter as though each one was borrowed, and though Alexander had spent his life crushing incompetence wherever he found it, tonight he had no choice but to beg these men and women in white coats for answers, and yet they had none, only confusion, only helplessness, and when he barked at them that he would fund every treatment, hire every expert, fly in every medicine, the director could only whisper that nothing was working, that her body seemed to be rejecting life itself, and though Alexander wanted to roar in rage, he knew money could not buy time, not if they didn't know what they were fighting. Inside the ward Emily lay on the pristine white sheets, her golden brown hair damp with sweat, strands sticking to her forehead, her once bright eyes closed, her fingers twitching weakly as if reaching for something in dreams, her fragile chest rising and falling shallowly under the tangle of tubes and wires, the monitors above her head blinking and beeping erratically, a cruel symphony of her decline, and around her, nurses adjusted equipment, wiped her skin, injected doses of medication, but their eyes betrayed worry because nothing was changing, and Alexander, standing just beyond the threshold with fists clenched, could barely breathe as he remembered the laughter of his daughter only days ago, her teasing voice calling him too serious as she spun barefoot in the mansion garden despite his lectures about propriety, her joy in things money couldn't buy, her habit of sneaking into the kitchen to taste desserts before dinner, her insistence that despite being the heir to his empire, she wanted to live freely, to choose her own life, and he, hardened as he was, could never deny her those small rebellions, for she was the light that broke through the steel walls he had built around his heart. Now that light was flickering, and he felt himself unraveling, yet in the corner of that sterile, glittering ward stood someone who did not belong by the standards of wealth, the maid Rosa, a young woman in her 20s whose uniform, though neat, was plain compared to the designer clothes of others, whose hands were calloused from scrubbing floors, whose face carried the tired shadows of long hours, and yet her brown eyes were wide with a different kind of awareness, a quiet sharpness born of hardship, for Rosa had grown up in a world where survival demanded noticing details others ignored, and though she was meant to be invisible here, just a servant allowed only because Emily had insisted she stay. She could not stop watching, could not silence the knot of dread in her stomach as she saw the clear fluid drip rhythmically into Emily's fragile vein, for earlier, when she had been carrying laundry past the medical waste bins, she had noticed a discarded 4-bag half full, its faintly sharp, bitter odor catching her attention immediately, and though she had hesitated, thinking perhaps she was imagining it, memories of her late father surged back, the man who had worked in chemical factories. Before dying in a tragic explosion Rosa had never forgotten, the man who had taught her the sense of danger, cyanide's bitter almond whisper, arsenic's metallic tang, the acrid sting of synthetic toxins, and that smell she'd caught in the trash had been wrong, out of place in a sterile hospital, a whisper of poison dressed as medicine, and as she now watched Emily's skin grow paler, her pulse weakened despite all the doctor's efforts, her heart thudded with certainty. Something was killing her that had nothing to do with disease, and though fear gripped her throat because maids were not meant to speak in rooms full of powerful men, something inside her snapped when the monitor gave a terrifying flatline beep for a fraction of a second before bouncing weakly back, and without thinking she cried out, her voice breaking like thunder through the frantic silence, "The 4 is poisoned." And the entire room froze as though struck by lightning, the doctor staring at her in disbelief, the nurses gasping, Alexander himself whipping his head toward her, his expression carved in shock because nobody, not even he, had dared voice suspicion of foul play, but here was the maid, trembling, her hands clenched, her eyes blazing with desperate conviction, and the senior doctor immediately barked, "Nonsense. This is a sterile facility," while another nurse whispered angrily, "Who let her speak?" But Alexander, though torn between fury and disbelief, had built his empire on reading people, on knowing when a man was bluffing in a deal, when betrayal lurked behind smiles, and in Rosa's tear-streaked face he saw no lie, only terror and truth, and in that instant his instinct screamed louder than the doctor's protests, so with a voice that cut like steel he ordered, "Stop the 4. Now." The physicians balked, arguing that cutting the fluids would endanger Emily, but Alexander's roar silenced them, "Do it, or I'll have you dragged out." And under his iron command, a trembling nurse clamped the line shut, disconnecting the tube, while Rosa's knees almost buckled with relief though her heart still raced, and for a long moment the room held its breath as Emily's monitor steadied just slightly, her pulse still weak but no longer plunging so erratically, a fragile thread of life clinging on, and Alexander's gaze darkened as the chief physician, under pressure, reluctantly tested a drop of the 4 fluid, his hands trembling, his face paling as the results confirmed Rosa's accusation. The solution contained traces of a synthetic poison, carefully diluted but deadly with prolonged exposure, and the room erupted in gasps, some nurses recoiling as if they too had been poisoned, others darting nervous glances as though the culprit might be among them, and Alexander's entire body trembled with rage, his fists clenched until his knuckles went white. His teeth gritted as he realized that someone had dared to try and murder his daughter under the protection of his wealth, in the very ward he had secured, and his eyes turned back to Rosa, the invisible maid whose scream had just saved Emily's life, his steel-gray eyes softening for the briefest second as he whispered hoarsely, "You saved her," words he had never said to a servant in his life, words heavy with gratitude and desperation, but Rosa only shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her trembling hand, and whispered back, "Not yet, sir. Whoever did this will try again," and those words sank like stones into the silence, casting a shadow deeper than any storm, for if poison had reached Emily here, in the heart of safety, then the enemy was not far away, it was inside, watching, waiting, ready to strike again, and thus the night that had begun as a battle against illness had transformed into a war against betrayal, a war where the maid's courage would become the shield of the powerful, and the truth, still hidden, would shatter everything they thought they knew.